Flanders from Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty is standing by on the Homesteader Store hotline. Homesteader Store, good people with the right stuff. Kubota, LS Tractor, and Cub Cadet. Hi, Will. How are you?
Pretty good. How are you?
Well, I'm not on the Beltline, so I'm okay. I'm good. I'm not sitting in traffic, which means everything is okay, at least with regard to what I hate the most, sitting in traffic. So let's talk about school spending here. We're constantly being told that we don't spend enough on education. And I'm looking at, and thank you for making it very clear, this is inflation adjusted spending on school in Wisconsin from 1959 to 2019. And it's a straight line up. We are spending so much money on education, inflation adjusted, that you've got to wonder how we can be at sub 40% proficiency. I wonder what it was when we were spending so much less in 1959. I wonder if most kids could read and do math at grade level.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this is one of those things, as I was doing the analysis, I kind of had to check myself. I'm like, is this right? Is it really this much of a change? But, I double-checked it, and indeed it was. This is data from the Department of Education, so it's not some right-wing conspiratorial source or something like that, right? It's data from the Department of Ed. In 1959, we were spending $1959 $413 per student, and when we inflation adjust that, that's $3,600 per student. Today, or in 2019 to today, we're spending nearly $17,000 per student on average. And again, as you said at the beginning, this is inflation adjusted. So after the inflation adjustment, we're spending $11,000 more per student than we were in 1959. And, you asked the question about what were proficiency rates back then. While we don't have a continual stream of data, I think, anecdotally, you talk to folks, and folks were getting out of high school knowing how to read. Folks were getting out of high school knowing how to do basic math, things that we can't say about the education system today.
Which is amazing to me. So as we spend more, really more, we're not using inflation to try to hide this information. And inflation adjusted dollars, $11,000 more per student. Now it's $17,000. $17,000 is substantially higher than most private schools charge people in Wisconsin, Will. $17,000. We have 37% proficiency in reading and math. Right around 37% across the state. So I don't know how anybody thinks any of this makes sense, but we just saw another record-breaking increase in education. This only goes to 2019. When we go to 2024 to 2025, it's even higher than that. And I don't understand why nobody actually expects that money to teach kids. Where is it going?
Yeah, when we did this look back, I on my tweet originally, and by my modest standards, this kind of blew up to some extent. But I said this is the definitive counterpoint to the argument that we need more money, because we were getting decent outcomes in 1959, spending $3,600 per student. Obviously, we're getting worse outcomes today. And where is the money going? I think what we need to do is for teachers that are saying they're underpaid, right? I think we need to turn the question around. $17,000 per student. There's more than $300,000 of value in every single Wisconsin classroom. So when a teacher wants more funding, I think rather than going to the state and saying we need more money, they should be asking their own district, where are you spending all this money that's not going into my pocket?
I also want to, and I don't mean to be cruel. I don't. But I want to know why, if teachers are going to complain about not having enough money, nobody asks them to explain why they can't simply teach kids to read and write. And if there's a good explanation for it, we want to hear it. Are you doing so much paperwork you can't teach? Are you being told to teach things that have nothing to do with the subject? Please explain to us why you need more money if fewer and fewer kids are coming out the other side being able to know their mother tongue and add a column of 2-digit numbers in their head.
No, you're absolutely right, and we know from our looks at the curricula that are being taught around the state, it's more and more focused on these DEI things. It's less and less focused on the priorities, less and less focused on teaching the basics of math and reading. There is a good bill that was passed last legislative session that'll kind of force some districts to go back and actually teach reading and phonics. What a concept! But you're absolutely right. Teachers shouldn't be rewarded if we're getting proficiency rates this low. But the bottom line is we're spending more money on education. We're spending more money on bureaucracy in schools. and we're getting less and less as a return on investment.
Teachers' unions are there to represent the salary interest of teachers and the political interests of the neo-Marxist left. Who's standing up for the kids? Who is there to represent the interests of kids who can't, and we have lowered proficiency standards, who can't do basic math. Many of these, we're talking about kids who are proficient. I don't know what the below basic numbers are, but they're alarmingly high as well. Functional illiteracy coming out of Wisconsin schools as well. That $17,000 per student's going to support that too. But we don't seem to have an advocate for reading and doing math at grade level. I find that astonishing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you see that parents have tried to become the advocates in recent years. There's been a great parental empowerment movement both in Wisconsin and around the whole country, but it's hard to fight the monolith. It's hard to fight the public education monopoly, and it's a challenge that's never ending. But you see it in other areas as well. You see the WMC poll where 76% of businesses say they don't have people coming out of schools that are prepared for the workforce. So it's not just a problem of kids going to college. It's a problem of folks that are trying to get into the workforce, those important manufacturing jobs and things like that we have around Wisconsin. Major problem, but more money is clearly not the answer.
Yeah, well, we just dumped a whole bunch more money and no accountability for the school system. So where do you think the big change would come from to get us back to 1959 when most kids could read coming out of school, for heaven's sakes? I mean, I don't think that's too much to ask for the now. Do you happen to have the aggregate amount of money we have spent since 1959 in education so that we could have kids that are functionally illiterate?
Yeah, that'd be a good number to get. I'll try to pull that for the next time we talk.
But is it DPI? Sure. Is it coming from DPI? Is it coming from where? I mean, are school boards? Shame on school boards, by the way. Shame on school boards for wanting to have absolutely nothing to do with the performance of these schools. But incidentally, I just saw a 10 worst schools list coming out of Wisconsin, most of them in Milwaukee and Racine. So, I mean, but nobody cares. So where does most of the change, where would most of the change need to take place?
So I think we have to look at the layer upon layer of bureaucracy that we've introduced into schools over the last 50 years. In a school in 1959, you probably had a principal and teachers and maybe a few support staff, right? You had some, the lunchroom folks and the janitors and things like that. Now we have a DEI representative. Now we have 14 assistant principals. Now we have a communications director for the school district. Layer upon layer of bureaucracy. And we'll actually have a report coming out in a couple weeks that'll do a deeper dive into this question. But I think that's where we look first. Cull all of that stuff out of the system, and then you can put more money into the classroom and actually lower the cost overall, while we're still actually spending more on things that affect education and help students do better. Plus
improve the curriculum, because the content of the classroom is an absolute hot mess. So Federal Department of Education. First, Federal Department of Education, they tell everybody below them what they're supposed to do. So DPI, then, of course, they need a gigantic array of bureaucrats, and they have split everything into CSAs, so everybody's under a different, a different group. And those groups then have district superintendents, and those district superintendents have school superintendents and school principals, and then the school board at the bottom gets, the only way the school board can even know what the hell's going on is if it's filtered through all these layers to them.
Yep, that's a great summary. And I think, one thing we're trying to do at Will through our model school board policies is try to re-empower school boards to take a more active role, because it's overwhelming. You get elected to the school board, you don't really feel like you have any power because of all that bureaucracy and those layer upon layer of government that you've laid out. So I point to our model school board policies as well. It's trying to get folks on the school boards to know they have the power. They can take this stuff back and take control back from the bureaucrats, and that's the way to do it.
How to rein in DPI? How do you rein in DPI? We don't need DPI. We don't. We really don't. And we don't need the Federal Department of Education. But how do you rein in and reduce the footprint of DPI? Because it's a constitutional position, at least the superintendent is. But is the agency itself not subject to some kind of legislative constraint?
Yeah, that's something we've certainly looked at, many times from a legal side in the past.
They're not doing anything good. Yeah, go ahead.
No, the reality is that, we need to get folks focused on that election and get folks to overcome the massive number of teachers union folks that come out and voted that are only interested in their own benefits. get folks to realize how important this election is, come out and elect a candidate that actually will do something about it from the top down.
Can the legislature just gut the agency, though, and say, okay, fine, we can't touch the constitutional elected office, but can we just do away with the giant bureaucratic bloat? The bloat, by the way, which got in the way of the resistance of Common Core. We already had the superintendent commit the state of Wisconsin to a massive investment in a bad idea that now we are stuck with. So is there a way that the legislature, assuming we ever get a decent governor again, can say this is not going into the budget this time?
I think, I'll caveat that I'm one of the non-lawyers that will, but I do think you can gut the agency and sort of leave the department head as a figurehead. There are some limitations there that have been litigated in court in the past, but that is a viable option, certainly, to have the legislature say with the power of the purse, we're not funding this any longer.
Yeah, we're not going to fund this any longer. They have done nothing of value, or at the very least, force everybody to come in and explain what value they bring, because they're driving up the cost of education. And coming out the other side are kids who can't read and do math. And I mean, I think everybody should be forced to justify it. I think the person who's leading the teachers union local ought to be forced to justify why you shouldn't force teachers to behave any differently. I think we should be seeing the DPI and all of the bureaucrats underneath DPI, underneath the superintendent, come in and explain. All of the superintendents of the districts come in and explain. That assumes you have to assume that you care enough, though. And a lot of the Republicans kind of say, well, school choice, and that's the only tool in the education toolbox. And we don't have school choice for everyone. And I don't think it would be enough to fix public education.
Yeah, obviously we're big proponents of school choice, but the reality is that even in states that have even more extensive programs than we do, 70 to 80% of kids are still going to stay in public schools. That's why we say it's not going to destroy public education, right? Because it's simply not going to happen. But the other side of the coin is we need to not ignore the vast majority of kids that will be in public schools for the foreseeable future.
Absolutely true. And we're the ones who are going to be told to pay ever more, even as population of kids go down. You watch the costs of public education go up with not a single point of improvement. Will Flanders, that graph you put on Twitter, it was it caught my attention. It made me mad. Good to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. Have a good afternoon.
You as well.